This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Apostates Anonymous, the show you turn to when you're no longer an evangelical, or even a Christian. Join hosts Matthew J. DiStefano and Keith Giles as they tip over just about every sacred cow known to man. You're sure to have a good time. If you're a heathen or heretic or apostate or reprobate. If you're an evangelical, maybe you won't have such a good time. But either way, we want you to listen. You can check out Apostates Anonymous wherever you get your podcast fix. Now, on to the show.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a podcast known as This Is Not Church! Deftly hosted by two brothers with extraordinary beards, John and Nat Turney. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
All right, that flopped utterly, but you could see where my intentions were. Right? It is interesting to have the thoughts that go on in my head. So that I can't hardly. But anyway, welcome to the podcast. We're glad that you're here. My name is Nat. I'm with my brother John. This is not church because if it was church, you'd have left by now. That seems to be truer and truer as the weeks and months go by. But we are joined this evening by our good buddy, Noel Sanger. I'm going to read you a little bit about him. I'm going to read the Noel or Noel?
Noel.
Sanger.
Yeah, well, I mean, I lived in Miami a long time, so if someone's Spanish is their first language, then I am Noel. You know, I mean, that's
Noel. I like it. Let's go with that. So Noel Sanger. Here we go. This is I'm gonna read the short version because you don't need to hear any more of my voice that is absolutely necessary. But Noel Sanger may have flown mostly under the mainstream radar, but he has cultivated a rich musical history along the way, releasing on some of dance music's top labels with a recent focus on his own dissident music imprint. Noel's productions make regular appearances in Beatport's top 10 genre charts and see support from the world's top DJs. Over the years, his work has been heard on labels such as Black Hole, Spinnin, Armada, Perfecto, High Contrast, Lost Language, Coldharbour, Mute, Dissident, and dozens more. He has remixed and worked with artists like Erasure, Nadia Ali, Taylor of Duran Duran, Matt Darey, Soul in the Machine, with Twin Peaks star Chrysta Bell, and Markus Schulz. There's some amazing names in that list, by the way.
Yeah,
that
really
I just blew through.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Evolving to deeper sounds, Noel's label Dissident Music was first launched in 2007 and produced a number of hits throughout the ensuing 7 years. Recently relaunched as part of Miami's Essential Media Group, Dissident has gone from strength to strength with nearly a dozen Beatport top 10 chart showings in as many months. As a DJ, this one-time Tiesto tourmate has manned the booth at some of the world's best clubs and festivals, sharing the stage with some of electronic music's top names. It isn't always the case that after this many years, an underground artist remains as creative and relevant as Noel has, but between his productions, his label, and his expertise behind the decks, Noel is proving without question that the best is yet to come. Dude, that's a great bio, by the way.
Well,
that's amazing.
Thanks.
Wow.
I can hook you up with the guy that wrote it.
Nice. I'm not looking at him. No,
it's always a little bit embarrassing to hear it or read it in the wild because it's not. I mean, I'm in a very little niche of the dance music world that is not. It's not like you read the bio and it sounds like wow, it's so great. And it's not really that big of a deal, Like I DJ in some clubs and I make some dance tracks. So.
Okay, wait a minute, hold up. I'm not going to allow that to happen. That's not true. You're in this niche. You're a big deal. I know you are. I've seen the post and I've seen the. I mean, again, it's a niche that I think a lot of people like me aren't super familiar with. But man, I don't sell yourself short, dude. There's a
I'll take it. Thank you. I mean, it's, I've been doing it a long time and, since the 90s and, it's been fun.
Yeah. So for novices like me, John and I are both musicians. Okay. So we're not novices when it comes to music, but when it comes to electronic music, I would put myself square in the novice category. I'm appreciative of it. I just don't know enough about it. So maybe walk us through some of that, if you would, kind of give us a little introduction.
Well, I mean, I got into this stuff like in the early 90s, you know, and I had been in bands and, you know, played guitar and sang and attempts at bands, you know, and I guess it was there. I remember there being a few records that really, like, I was DJing at a radio station, and there was this whole like new sound that was coming through, and it just sort of grabbed my attention. And then when I realized that like I could do it on my own, didn't have to have a band, you know, it was like, oh, and of course, you know, producing back in those days, I did have a partner that I teamed up with for the first few years. But producing back in those days was, the technology wasn't where it is today. But it was, you know, it was cool. It was exciting. And then there was a whole, maybe the big selling point was that there was the whole scene around it sort of had this ethos to it. You know, people used to say plur, peace, love, unity, respect. And, you know, you'd go to these events and it was very, I mean, there was definitely drug use, you know, I mean, that you can't leave that out and pretend like it wasn't there, but that there was a very there was something very innocent about it and desexualized, and you know, like it's not like going to a club, like, you know, the going out to get laid guys, right? It's like it was very egalitarian and very respectful, and I just really liked it. I liked that you know, the idea of peace, love, unity, and respect. Like this is something that's good for the world, and I can make music and have a great time playing it out, and you know, potentially have a positive effect on people. You know, so that's kind of where it began for me. But it's been, you know, I mean, the scenes. There's so many scenes. There's so many different varieties of the music, and obviously it's a youth culture, and I am no longer a youth, but I'm still doing it. And a lot of guys, you know, my age are still doing it. And, you know, we're actually some of the biggest DJs and producers out there are, you know, like in their 40s and 50s at this point, because we love it. You know?
Yeah. Well, I would expect that, like anything else, experience counts for something. You've been doing this long enough. You've got a feel for it, right? I have listened to a bunch of your stuff. And again, from a novice point of view, I love the creativity of it. You know what I mean? I love the idea that you can do what for some people, as maybe a casual listener, there might be something that sounds repetitive even, or and there's so much creativity in that though. Like I'm listening for the hooks and I'm listening for the, that's cool. You know, then I'm kind of imagining, okay, it's one, you know, I'm trying to put myself in that club in Miami and go, okay, this would be the scene, right? This would be the deal.
Repetition, the repetitiveness is a big deal because that is sort of, you know, there's a very like, I'm going to sound really, it's going to be a little cliched, but you know, there's drugs or not, there's an altered sort of state thing that goes to
it. Bit of a trance thing going.
Yeah. I mean, it's like worship music, like repeating the 4 chords over and over and saying the hook, you know, it brings you to an emotional point, you know, and people talk about like shamanistic, you know, ancient cultures and the repetitive rhythms and the drumming and things like that. I mean, it's really the same. And that's one of the things about, you know, techno and house music is that you know, people are dancing and feeling the groove, and so you want to service that. You don't want to go on too long where they get bored, but you want to, you know, there'll always be variations and things that sort of propel the piece, the track on. Right, but the repetition is actually. I remember in like 1994, it was a big deal. There was the UK crime bill where they tried to like outlaw raves. And one of the actual wording of the legislation referred to sound systems playing repetitive beats, you know, and that's the hallmark of the whole thing is the repetition and the flow, I guess would be a good way to put it.
I live in Northern California, Humboldt County. There's a town just north of where I live called Arcata, and it's kind of a hippie beat generation still, but there's this place in Arcata called the Plaza, and you'd have a lot of people who come there and drum.
Right.
And so the city got annoyed with it, and they actually created an ordinance about repetitive drumming. You could get cited if you were repetitive drum. So if you sat in like a drum circle and created a repetitive drum beat, right? You could actually get cited, and given a ticket for repetitive drumming.
Didn't they use that same ordinance to go after like people who were kicking hacky sacks though, because it was repetitive?
Probably.
You have a really.
Well, I mean, this was the issue, right? So it's a college town. The Plaza, everywhere around the Plaza is just bars, and they also put a noise ordinance in. So I played in a band that played at these bars, and we had to keep our decibel level down, or we'd get cited in a bar for playing. I'm like, I'm going to get a ticket for playing in a bar too loud. I absolutely don't. Yeah. So I can understand the whole going after a song or a beat or anything because it's repetitive, because that's their way of going after this counterculture, right? That's really what they're trying to do.
Exactly. It wouldn't be within the scope of a podcast to really describe, to do a masterclass on all the different genres or, whatever. But there's a lot of different sounds out there. What I do is pretty specific. I've kind of veered off from it here and there over the years, but it generally is somewhat melodic, progressive house or, melodic techno. Those are the kind of terms that are used, or just electronic music.
Well, I again, from personal experience, having listened to quite a bit of your music, I'm like, that was what struck me. It was like, okay, there is that melodic nature to it. There seems to be, at least in a lot of the songs that you craft, like, okay, there's a hook. Okay, there's something that you can kind of anchor the whole thing to. And I would think that's got to be part of the skill, would be knowing where that line is between, okay, it's repetitive enough that it engages and it hooks, but without, like you said, without going on so long that people are like, okay, at some point this has to change, right? And I never got that sense with your music. And I think a lot of people are slinging stuff out there. I'm sure it's probably true. Like anything else, there's probably people out who are doing a half-ass, who are like, oh, I can make techno. Anyone can do that. And people who are really good at it.
Yeah, there's a variety. I mean, currently now the newer, the newer, more mainstream electronic artists are putting out tracks that are literally 3.5 to 4 minutes long, which is what you would expect for normal songs. But for this kind of music, 6 is like a minimum. And, back in the 90s, we were doing 12-minute tracks. It was like everything was really long. Be like really 3 songs worth of these all movements, all in one song. But, so that's kind of the thing now. And, there's a lot of great music out there. There's a lot of great music that is, working, that people love. I don't like, but it's, I recognize that it's good. And I know that, the audience, the kind of music that I make is maybe in general a bit older. It's not the 25-year-olds going to Electric Daisy Carnival that are into, the artists that, that play the kind of stuff that I make. But, that's where we're at. So here we are.
But it's cool that as you go through the kind of people that you've collaborated with, then there's been some pretty cool folks you've collaborated with, and they're not all inside of that genre, right?
Right. There's been a few that stand out from the list you read. I got to remix Erasure collaboratively with another producer duo back in 2014.
Wow. Okay.
And that was a commissioned remix where we basically took the vocals from Erasure, did like a Christmas album, and we
wow. Okay.
Essentially, like nothing from the original was used except for the vocals, right? And we took what was a down tempo kind of tune and turned it into a club type song.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Erasure is a band that I listen to.
Love them.
And just being able to work with even just their music that would be just
right.
phenomenal.
It was a big honor, honestly. I'm a big Depeche Mode fan, and Vince Clarke being a founding member of Depeche Mode, and then everything that they've done as Erasure is just incredible. The Duran Duran thing, the same guys that I did the Erasure remix with, they actually did a single with John Taylor on vocals. And so they called me and said, hey, will you do a remix on this? So that was another big deal because, John Taylor liked my remix and they ended up cutting the video to it. And, it wasn't a big record. It wasn't like whatever, but they put it up on DuranDuran.com. So
That's cool.
I was pretty stoked,
Well, John Taylor's the bass player, right? For Duran Duran,
the bass player, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm a bass player, so that's why I know that.
Look at John with his 80s pop chops. All right. I was like, Duran to who? No, I'm kidding. Are you hungry like the wolf, John?
What's cool is like, and you would understand this being able, this whole thing recently with like pulling vocals tracks, right? And putting up online, this is what Freddie Mercury sounded without
like an isolated vocal track.
Right. So this is kind of like what you're doing, right? You're pulling isolated tracks out, right?
They're sending the stems to us. Yeah.
So, one of the coolest things I heard not recently, but in the last few years was an isolated bass track of Duran Duran. And I'm like,
oh, wow, yeah.
And I was like, damn, he is, even back then, I'm like, it's just a pop band. I mean, how hard could that be? But then they did these isolated bass tracks of his, and they're phenomenal.
Yeah, I in real time, like in those days, like I wish I would have sort of recognized that more because when I wanted to talk about a bass player when I was a teenager, it was Iron Maiden, Steve Harris,
right?
Yep.
We're talking about
Billy Sheehan, Eddie Lee, like all those guys. I was way more into the rock and the progressive metal and stuff.
No, it sounds like you and I are cut from the same cloth because I go back now and I'm super nostalgic about Duran Duran, even though I didn't like them when they were popular,
right?
Because they were too popular. You know what I mean? Like all the teenage girls that I ran with in junior high and high school were like falling all over themselves for Duran Duran. And so me being the contrarian that I am, I'm like, yeah, but have you listened to Iron Maiden? Come on.
Yeah,
man.
same. Absolutely the same.
Killing it.
In fact, I'll tell you a funny story is that like I semi-recently, I'm a huge fan of Duran Duran now, and like and I have been since the 90s, but I really wasn't in the 80s. Like you would expect that to have begun. And but my ex-wife, I don't know, one of my kids was saying something about it to my ex-wife, and she was in the 80s a fan of all of the alternative side of music that I didn't like, and she's like, "Why does your father like Duran Duran now?" Like it was almost offensive that I'm like, "Yeah, I know, sorry."
Look at you, Mr. Johnny Come Lately to the whole Duran Duran party.
Sorry, I had a lot of Dokken to listen to back in the 80s.
I mean, there was so much more Dio I hadn't heard yet.
Right.
And, we were actually, like, it was funny because I went through this phase in the 80s, especially. John and I were both big into metal. So like 80s metal was a big deal. And then sometime in the mid 80s, I made the switch more to like punk. And so I really got into bands like Dead Kennedys and Misfits and started going down that road a little bit. And I can go back to those bands and go, they were killing it. I mean, the stuff that Black Flag was doing in the 80s is still like some of the best, just raw punk that was, I don't know, I just really enjoyed that stuff. But then I come back, like, still in the back of my mind, the soundtrack of my teen years is 80s pop. Right. Like I didn't like it when it was happening. And now I hear, Men at Work, and I'm like, oh, I love that song. That's a great song. They from the land down under. Me too. That's amazing. So that process of taking a track like that then and remixing it, is that something you can do on your own? Or does it have to be something that's done collaboratively with the artist? Is it something that you're able to do and go, hey, I'm going to do a remix of a U2 song? Do you have to have their permission to do it, or can you do it without?
So, I mean, you can. You can do it, but you can't release it. That's the thing. Is like with the ones we're talking about. These are where the label is actually sanctioning, commissioning, paying us to do the remix. Right? It's actually a commissioned or sanctioned thing.
Gotcha.
A lot of people these days, especially now that we have these programs that can separate out the parts from the song and give you an isolated vocal. A lot of people are doing a lot more, bootlegs where they do their own remix. I had one where I actually just put it up on Bandcamp for free. It's 15 years old almost, but a track that I did back in like 2007, 2008. A friend of mine did a mashup with an Everything But the Girl song, Wrong. And so it was really perfect. And I was like, and in that, at the time, I was like, hey, send me the vocal and I'll put it into the original session of this track and mix it down so that it all kind of sits together right, rather than, vocal sitting on top of the, he just had the track, right? Like the stereo track. So we did that, and it went over really, really, a lot of people played it. It was kind of club, whatever kind of success that is, like people liked it. It's not available commercially, but Everything But the Girl just put out their first music in like 24 years. So I thought, let me put this up on Bandcamp. They don't really release that. It's free, Right. So I just put it up there. But yeah, I mean, that was one where it's not, that's not we can't release that. In fact, I had a pretty big dance label in 2009 that wanted to release that if they could license the vocal, but that was not possible because Warner didn't want to let us license the vocal. So it never got actually released.
Well, that's too bad,
Yeah,
but right. But what kind of dissident would you be if you followed the rules? I mean, come on,
that's
you're trying to upset some stuff, right?
Just trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, well, I dig that. It's interesting because, like we were talking offline before all this started, you and I met, and I used, I have to say met in air quotes. We met online. We got to know each other through theology groups. And we were, at the time, I think, I think you were going to seminary at the time.
Well,
were you going to seminary to become an Episcopal priest?
Sort of. That's a thing.
My memory's fuzzy. I've had, a handful of alcoholic beverages since then.
You're right. But there, there's some details to that. Yeah. I wasn't going to seminary. I had done some theological study with an online, I won't mention it, but an online, like hyper charismatic, like supernatural Bible school or whatever.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Right.
And so I had done that, and I just, through a series of events, wound up, and I wanted to become a pastor or some kind of minister or something like that. I really was like moved to sort of maybe follow that path, because the best way I can describe it is like, I read The Shack, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that sort of like impacted me very deeply. And I thought, I want to be somebody that's in the position to go into someone's shack with them, right? To be able to walk through the great sadness with people. And I was pretty sincere in that. But I also, I think over, in the intervening years between then and now, I realized like, holy crap, I am not, that's too much. I'm not cut out for that.
Right.
I will absolutely be, no, I can't, I couldn't. But anyway, through a series of events, I wound up with, it was a communion called it was the Evangelical Episcopal Communion. And then there was a kind of a splinter. And so it was the CEC, then it was the EEC. But in any event, there were some classes going on, and I was being mentored by the bishop who was a really wonderful person, to become a priest. I was ordained as a deacon in that communion, but there was a point where things got a little economically crazy. As a single dad with 3 teenagers, our house got hit with a hurricane, and we found out that our mortgage company had not paid the homeowner's insurance. So, it was like, so there were lawsuits, and then there was mold, and because I needed a new roof, and they didn't get the roof for a year, and then they wouldn't do the interior things. And then it was like, by the end of that, it was, by 2019, I was waking up, the hurricane was in 2017, but I mean, I was waking up sick. We were all waking up sick every day, like every single day. And it would take hours to just feel halfway normal, and we have to get out of the house as much as possible. It was a very bad situation. And I realized at that point, I need to just really focus on life and my family. And I don't have it in me to do this, becoming a priest thing. And I started questioning my own motivation for it. Was I my DJing was way down because in 2013 my kids came to live with me just completely, and that is a lot harder than just paying child support.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then of course not receiving any. But it was a tough time, and I started really questioning my motivation. Is there ego involved here? What exactly do I want out of this? What do I want to give to this? And it was also a pretty conservative communion. And looking down the road, I could see that there would be, I would be a dissident. And there would be some conflict, perhaps, because I am and always have been, affirming, open, more than open and affirming, like completely.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
I absolutely, and I know that if it got to the point where I was marrying people, my communion was not going to let me marry people of the same sex or gender. So I don't know. I was like, let me put a pause on all of this. And then more time went by. And, I kept trying to be, to sort of get myself back into it. And then, I signed up for, and this must have been in 2020, the Open Table, the Book of John. The Book of John
Table Conference with
the Open Table Conference, because I love everybody involved with that. It's just the most fantastic group, I think, theologically.
Like Kenneth Tanner and Brad Jersak and all those guys, right? And Paul Young and
I couldn't get myself to it's a weird thing to say, but it was just like, I'm signed up for this because theoretically I'm interested, but I was completely not interested. I just couldn't get myself to care. And I found myself not unfriending, but unfollowing people that just posted theological things, even though I agreed with them. And I thought that's great, but I'd just be like, okay, cool. Yeah, there's no hell. I get it. Don't
need to keep rehashing it.
I think I came to a point and it was really hard for me to sort of sort this out. Why is this thing about theology that was so lit me up inside for a few years there? Why is it not doing that now? And it was, so this was something I really tried to investigate. I don't know. I just think I came to a point where it's like, I don't care. Do your best, be a good person, and I don't have, we're all, I guess, for a long time, I felt like I had to push back against what I considered bad theology. And at some point I was like, no, I don't. We're all safe in the universe. And if I know that, I don't need to keep reading about how we're all safe in the universe. I think if there's that great quote from Richard Rohr that if God is Trinity and Jesus is the face of God, then it's a benevolent universe, and the universe is on your side, something like that. I'm mangling it now. But
I know what you mean now. I know that quote.
But it's kind of like that. And, there was a lot of pushing aside of my music that it has been my driving force, really the only thing that's made sense to me since I was a teenager. And I was pushing that aside for a while. In 2015, I moved from South Florida up here to Orlando, put my kids into a Christian school, Assemblies of God, and really thought everything was going to work out great. And I didn't, and I was people that were in my life were, telling me that it's time. You have to do something else. You shouldn't be doing, focusing on music. That's that's like the Israelites wanting to go back to Egypt, and I listened to those people, and I don't think they were right. So
well, we've all done that, haven't we? Listen to people who are like, why did I listen to you? You're full of shit. But it's interesting though, because it sounds like our, in some ways, obviously in other ways not, but in some ways our journeys have been parallel. You know what I mean? Because when I first met you, I was very active in these groups. And we're actively really, especially with like Michael Hardin's group, really diving into mimetic theory and really diving into this whole idea of nonviolence. And I'm still a big proponent of all of that. I still think mimetic theory is great. I still am a proponent of nonviolence. I still don't believe that God tortures people in hell. I am affirming of all people, but I'm like you. I got to a point where I'm like, I don't need to keep rehashing this stuff. And some of the groups that I was in were, I mean, that's all they ever talked about was maybe one little facet of that. And for a little while, I needed that, I think, because I needed that community of people to say, okay, you're not the only one who thinks this. There's justification for some of this. You know what I mean? You don't feel like you're on an island somewhere all by yourself. But at some point when that stuff gets firmly enough in you, you don't need to keep talking about it. I'm tired of having these same old arguments with people. I'm tired of trying to convince people. Let's just go do something else. And so in your case, it sounds like let's go do something else. Well, let's go do the thing that we always loved. Let's just go do music.
Yeah. I mean, and I can't say that it's been, I had a couple of years of real like family level crisis because of living in a house with black mold, and literally moved out of that place to where I'm renting now on March 13th, 2020. So wow. I don't know if you remember anything important in the world that was going on around March of 2020, but it was just like, I got out of the moldy house situation, the sick everyday situation, and then it was pandemic. So I'm really just now, I'm just starting to DJ again. Like since 2019, like I'm playing next month. It's my first actual, I did a couple of things, last year, but just small. I did a Miami Winter Music Conference thing, which, is a little different. And it was outside in a, rooftop, oceanfront rooftop situation. So, lots of ventilation.
Yeah, of course.
So
you could have come to Texas and done whatever you wanted. We didn't even shut down for the pandemic.
Well, I'm in Florida, so
just come up. No, you would have come here and they'd be like, "You don't play country? Get the hell out."
I mean, yeah, we were open. I remember like in 2020, like October of 2020, like when it was like, okay, no more restrictions. And our clubs, we had club packed. They were packed, unmasked clubs packed. And I was just like, you people are crazy. I am not going to be a part of that. So
that was hella triggering for me because, the pandemic. And I mean, I don't mean to throw all of Texas under the bus, but I live in West Texas.
Right.
Very conservative, it was 2 months into this whole, stay at home pandemic thing. And we were all over it. I mean, and there was nobody here to enforce any of it. So pretty much feeling like we could just, I mean, there were ordinances that were on the books, but that weren't enforced. And so we had this really strange thing in San Angelo where for about the first almost year of the pandemic, we were almost untouched. And part of that was just because we're a little bit isolated. We're not on a main interstate. You know what I mean? You don't end up in San Angelo, Texas, unless you mean to come to San Angelo, Texas.
Right.
But when it did come, it came with a vengeance, because then there was all the bad habits we had. Suddenly, now you just been getting away with it for 8 or 9 months because you just hadn't had the infection yet. And all of a sudden we went from having like 2 people die within these months. And then all of a sudden we were looking at hundreds of deaths, and still people in complete and utter denial that it was even happening. I mean, they're like false flag, like this stuff isn't real. These are flat earthers in their level of denial. These are like, they're religious zealots in the fact that they're just convinced every word that ever comes out of a mouth of anyone connected to the government is a lie. And so COVID's not real. These deaths aren't real. It was a strange thing. And it took me a while to get past that. We were still trying to pastor a church at that time, and having to push back from even some of our own church members, like, when are we going to get back to meeting in person? I'm like, when this is over. Like, this is crazy. I mean, what are you in such a hurry for? So I can understand. So you had that on the heels of all the other stuff. So you had, man, there was a couple tough years, man.
Yeah, it was a little bit of stuff. I had my divorce, And those are a lot of fun. I don't know if you've never been, you guys should try it. It's great.
I actually haven't tried, but I've been
don't
thinking about it. No,
Does Kim know this?
Kim does not listen to the podcast, and I can joke about this because she'll never hear it.
Yeah, well, that's good.
But she's still going to call me in 10 minutes and go, what the fuck are you talking about? Anyway, but so you had that, so you don't recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is a lot of why I grew okay. I'll like do a little like background. I grew up
absolutely
super, 80s kid, super evangelical. Like I am the kid that got in trouble at high school for handing out gospel tracts, and people were throwing them on the ground. And then they called me down to the office. Hey, you're handing out so many, people are throwing them on the ground. Can you stop? And I was like, no, First Amendment, that kind of thing. I was like that kid. And then I stopped being that kid. And, I had years as an agnostic, and then I took some psychedelic drugs in the 90s, and for a short period of time, it was a semi-regular event, but it made me realize, okay, I don't think I can be an atheist. Like I really credit those experiences to having a more expansive view of reality. Like I haven't done it since the 90s, but they were important to me in the 90s. But I practiced Buddhism for 10 years. I was like very into like Ram Dass and like a lot of Eastern religions. I had a whole little mini Buddhist library, and isolated on my own, not part of any kind of community or anything like that. But I always was still somewhat, connected in my heart to Christianity and to the cross, the idea of the cross and what it means, even to me now, which is, self-giving, other-centered love, right? It's that idea of that the ultimate power of the universe would know what we feel as what I feel, me personally, right? So that was always appealing to me. And then, 2008, I got separated and ended up having to move. I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is my family's around there. I ended up having to move back to Florida so I could be near my kids, which I did. I got a place in Miami, just a mile from them, and was, part of their daily life as a result of that. But they were, without going into a lot of details, it wasn't a great situation for them to be with what they had going on at home with their mom. And ultimately they ended up coming to live with me. But in the process of all of that, obviously that's painful and that's difficult. And you go through a lot of things with going through a divorce. And it was like 2011 before my divorce was final. I got into another relationship and I really felt strongly that this was a person I was going to be with for the rest of my life. And it was great until it just wasn't there anymore. And I was like at an all-time low. And I think it's the cumulative effect of all of these things where, in 2013, I wound up in a urgent care, unable to breathe from the hyperventilating from, the anxiety and the pain and the stress and everything that I was going through. And it was then that I found myself diving headfirst back into Christianity. And I found myself a nice big mega church that I could go to. And I was literally like, I became like voracious for learning theology, reading the Bible, but learning how to read the Bible and hearing different viewpoints. And I got involved in that supernatural Bible school. And because I tend to be a little bit of an extreme personality, I went for the most extreme kind of Christianity that I could. And it's like, oh, this guy says that they raised 100 people from the dead 2 months ago, and it must be true. I believe him. Because I kind of feel like, why would they lie? But I think they were lying. And I I got involved with all of that, and I really wanted to believe it. I really wanted to for that to all be true. And I went out with friends at different times and just walking around to pray for people and the whole treasure hunt thing. And I was every single Sunday, I was watching every service from Bethel Church, I was so into it. I was so into it. And I think it was, really looking back, a big part of this was about me and how I was able to view myself and my own traumas that were completely unresolved and not dealt with. And finding a sense of who am I? And fitting into, trying to find some place that I belonged, I wanted to belong somewhere, and I wanted to be, I just wanted it all to be true, I wanted it all to give meaning to all of the things that I'd been going through, and then after my kids came to live with me, it was too much. My partner at the time, after she left, I had the biggest rent I'd ever paid in my life. And then suddenly the nightclub I was working for closed. And then she left. And then my kids came to live with me all in a month and a half period. And so I ended up, I actually ended up the first couple months of 2014 being homeless, with my kids. We never slept on the streets. They never missed school, but it was, we were running up credit cards to stay in motel rooms, trying to find some place that would rent to me because I had just been evicted. And, it's so it was a lot of struggles, and it was a lot of I want this to make sense. And I want to Romans 8:28 the hell out of this. And this is all for something. This is all, and maybe, maybe it was, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think, a big thing that happened during, when I started questioning myself, my motivations about what, becoming a priest and being a pastor and being in that kind of role, was I had to face some things, and I had to, realize that trauma is real, and I had a lot of it unresolved. And in a lot of ways, I was just looking for a way to feel good about myself, to feel like I'm okay and I matter, and and I'm safe. And I definitely, it's great if you think that you can, in the whole charismatic world, you can name it and claim it and decree things, and that gives you this sense of power over things that you don't really have control over. And I think that was very attractive to me. And
I can relate to some, actually a lot of what you're talking about. My wife's an atheist. We've been married for 31 years. And so she saw this. I mean, when I met her, I was not in any kind of faith community at all. I had left the church. I didn't want to be involved in that. So she met me as I'm trying to find a spot, right? So I did the same, I did this whole, I was Buddhist for quite, because when I left the church, it wasn't, I didn't leave faith. I left Christianity. I still felt like there was something that needed to fill that gap, that hole that I left. So, I was Buddhist, I was Taoist, I was, I've tried to find something that would fit. And I jokingly say the only thing I didn't try was, I didn't try being a Muslim. And the only reason I didn't is because, and it's not because I was any way against Muslims, but it was so shockingly just like Christianity that I didn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
I mean, the Christianity that I was raised in, right?
You never met any Sufis, man.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the Christianity that I was raised in was so much like the fundamentalist Islamic faith that I was I don't need to try that. I already did that.
Yeah. Right. Tried that one. Thanks.
Yeah. Tried that. Don't need to do it again.
Got the t-shirt and the scars.
But what kind of that I can connect with you is, it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like when you found something, you were 100% in.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of what, so when I kind of reconnected to Christianity about 7 years ago, my wife's biggest complaint was, I've lost you. You're 1,000% into that, and you don't want any, that's all you do now. That's all you talk about is your reconnection to the church. You don't, all of a sudden we don't matter as much. Your faith is all encompassing. It's like this burning fire within you that doesn't allow for anything else. And there are ways where I feel like that is helpful. Like, I'm diabetic. And when I found out I was diabetic, I was 100% in on becoming healthy. So I see that as like, okay, that works for me, because when I buy into something, I am 100% in. But when you talk about faith, I'm 100% in, regardless if it's right or wrong, regardless of anyone around me. I'm like, screw you all. I found the path. I'm in. And so that was the biggest, like, if you want to talk about deconstruction or whatever, that was the biggest thing I had to deconstruct, was that I had to bring along a family that wasn't in this faith. And I still had to connect with them in some way, even though they aren't going to be on this path with me when it comes to my faith. And that was the biggest thing I had to break down was, okay, yeah, I'm just being an asshole, expecting them to just make space for me as I plunder through whatever the fuck I'm doing right now. So I don't know if that was something that you had to deal with. It's just like, as you're like grabbing onto something, right? As you're trying to figure out how this fits.
Yeah, it definitely. And the one thing I'll say is, like, I can sit and like criticize, like, charismatic Christianity and mega churches and all of that all day long. And that's fine. But I will say that legitimately, the church I ended up at, they weren't super charismatic or anything. The church I ended up at in South Florida, I have pretty good things to say in general. I mean, it's still a mega church. It's still all the things that, whatever, but it was a life raft, it was at that time, like it's hard for me to put into words how destroyed my sense of self was. And the fact that I was able to grab a hold of that as and had this place to go to, and these people who were kind to me and who were, you got a church with literally like 8 campuses and 25,000 members. And the lead pastor, the senior pastor, would email me back, right? Like it was like, it made me, it was like you feel valued and you feel, especially if you're going through a protracted divorce. I mean, and it was like, I tell you, like the court, how many times, it was like 11 times in 14 months we were in court after the kids came to live with me. It was, it's just like, just constantly being like beaten down. So a lot of that was really important. And I like the idea of, I'm certainly no expert in, whatever, integral theory or spiral dynamics or whatever, but I like the transcend and include idea, because there's a lot of things that I have to say were very important and good and helped me, and I have to appreciate those things even if I don't feel the same way now. If I don't believe. So
say that again, because I think that was really important. You said transcend and include.
Transcend and include.
As in not transcend and move past necessarily.
Not necessarily. Well, it's not
transcend and abandon what was before, right?
Or it's not. Yeah, it's not move past and hate. It's not. Right. It's transcend and include. Like I can love things about hyper charismatic Christianity, even if I think it's done a lot of damage, and I think I can tell you a lot of bad things that I think about it, but I can love things about it too, and I can give it proper space in my heart and in my recollection or whatever, that I needed something at that time, and there are people that I care about who are there now and they need that, and I don't want to be like a crusader against it and like try to take something away from somebody, except to the extent that okay, well you're doing harm,
for sure.
If your church is promoting anti-trans legislation or something like that, I'm good. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm probably going to have something to say about that, right? But I like that though, because there is this tendency, and I have this tendency to, once you've moved beyond something, to then feel like I need to now reject that thing,
right?
Utterly, I think that's a really healthy way of looking at it. Going, okay, well, I wouldn't go back there,
right?
But they met a need in the moment, and they met a need at the time. And you're exactly right. We actually just had this exact part of this conversation with a guest about an hour and a half ago, where we're like, listen, we have people that we know and love who are still those places. It's not my job to shit on those things and somehow take that from them. It's not my job to crusade against those things, except, like you said, to the extent that people are doing harm, I have no problem calling that out. If I think that John and I are both passionate about not allowing the church to continue to marginalize already marginalized people, when we know very well that there are lives on the line and that there are people harming themselves because of the things. Okay, that stuff's getting called out. But there's all kinds of other bad theology that's just bad theology. It's just,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, I mean, I have bad theology. I guarantee it. I mean, there's certainly things that I think I know that I don't actually know. But I like that. I like being able to hold on to something that was valuable for a time, even if it's at least in recognition of how it got you from point A to point B.
Yeah, and give it the appropriate place of honor. You know, that I whatever I can do. I'm not. I'm not great at it. I mean,
I'm obviously not, because I'm like wowed by the idea of it. Like,
and this is the thing. Like, I'm not an atheist, but I probably agree. Like, I listen to a lot of atheist podcasts.
Yeah, me too. I mean, John and I were like, I agree with like most. We had an atheist on the podcast. We got to get more atheists, John. But we actually had a fairly well-known guy who's known as he's the friendly atheist, right? Or
Hemet Meta.
Yeah, fantastic guy. And we had a conversation, and we're like, man, we agree,
right, on
most of this stuff. And he's so great. He's the friendly atheist because he's not one of these crusader types. He's like, listen, if you believe in God, you're stupid. He's like, I don't really care. He would actually agree with everything you and I just said, which is, I don't care. Believe what you want to about God. However, when your religion becomes toxic and harmful, expect guys like me to throw the bullshit flag. Expect me to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what your Jesus told you to do. So he's like, man, stop giving us ammo and I'll go away.
Right.
It's like, you could take away my platform tomorrow, Christians. Just stop being dicks to each other.
Exactly. And it's guys like that, him specifically, and guys like that, they often know better what Jesus said to do.
Yeah,
than
for
the
sure.
people that are running around with his name emblazoned on everything they own.
Right, and some degree from some fly-by-night Christian academy. Wait a minute, but I know of whom you speak, but we won't drag that particular.
It flew by night. It did fly
by night, and it. But it's weird. It's like anything else. I think I find myself in sort of the same space you are. Where I'm like, I remember having, I don't know if you know who Michelle Collins is, but she was part of that. She was really involved with a lot of those same Facebook groups that you and I were when we first met.
Right. Yeah.
And she has gone on to write she's written at least one book, and we had her on the podcast to talk about a book. And that was her thing, was like, she's like, John, she's like, well, people ask me if I believe in God. And she's like, yeah, most days.
Yeah. Right.
And some days not at all. So, and I'm like, that to me, again, as a 20-something evangelical, that would have horrified me to hear somebody who claimed to be a Christian say that. As a 50-something guy who's now been alive long enough to go, there are days I don't know, and I think if you're honest, I think most of us fall in that agnostic camp where we go, well, I don't doubt the existence of God, I don't think, but I really do wonder how much I actually know about that thing. And that sounds healthy.
I would say that I think I'm pretty sure there's a God. Right? Like I almost like beyond belief. Like I have some level of certainty, but the question comes in when you try to define
God. Right. Well, I have to think that if I'd been born in, and this is what this is what kind of pushed me over the hill. I'm like, okay, well, if I had been born in another country, into another culture, into another paradigm, what would I mean, I would be a devout Hindu, probably. I think that's the way I think I'm sort of wired to be religious in a sense. I've never really had an issue with but I think I would have been a very devout, whatever faith I'd been born into. And you'd had a hard time convincing me of something else. I think, and that so much of this is so much happenstance. It's where you're born and what culture you're born into, and that I have this. The problem I have with Christianity is the same I have with any other exclusive religion, who think they know how this all works. In my imagination, I think Jesus is a pretty fine example to follow, especially if you take him seriously and you go, hey, let's take this others-focused, self-giving, suffering, the forgiving victim kind of, that's a way to be human I can get behind. That's countercultural and different. But that's not the Jesus most people have been introduced to. They get warrior Jesus and Rambo Jesus and
right. Muscular Christianity, as they call it.
Right. Draped in the American flag with the AK-47 across his chest, and couldn't even use an American rifle. What the hell, dude? Why Kalashnikov? Really? But anyway, that I find that all. I'm gonna cogitate. Huh? It's my new word, John.
Wow, that's a big word.
On transcend and embrace. Is that what you said? Transcend and embrace?
Transcend and include.
Include. Okay, include. No, I like it better.
Not my invention at all. It's something from spiral dynamics or integral theory, whatever.
Okay. I like it, though.
It lends itself to anyone who's finds themselves in any kind of therapy, right? I feel like one of the things that
Christians don't do therapy, just pray it away.
Well, I'm not a Christian, so then we're good.
Yeah, right. Oh, well then screw it. Go ahead and be a heathen.
But it kind of goes back to something you were saying. It was like, we were where we were and it served a purpose at that time. As we move forward, it's super easy to get angry about those moments, right? And find all the bad about those moments. Like I should not have been in that charismatic, fundamentalist, whatever, right? But a healthier way to look at it is, yes, there was a lot of trauma there, but can I find the good in it? Can I find the things that gave me joy when I was there? That was, a moment of inclusion, a moment of, that I felt wanted, needed, accepted, loved, right? All of that. And I guarantee you, I can find those moments, even in those times where now looking back, I'm like, that's not a good place. I would never want to go back there. But if I look back there, I can find some really good moments where people accepted me, gave me the love I needed to move forward. And I think, through therapy and through just acceptance, I think that's a better tool and bring that forward into my life as opposed to always looking at the negative, always looking at the reasons I had to leave, because that just propagates anger and resentment and all that, right?
Right. I mean, one thing is where it became very political over the Trump era, even to the point of like in my own family having rifts. And I'm sure that a lot of people have a similar experience where it's like, I don't want to talk about this man to my family members, but seeing a lot of the leaders who I appreciated at the time, some of the quote unquote, which I remember I was into very hyper charismatic Christianity. So like quote unquote prophets who were like, in 2020, very much, responsible for a large part of the mobilization that led to January 6th and the complete, denial of reality of like, no, he's actually still the president and, whatever. Like that stuff was really like that. I think that was like the final nail in the coffin for me of like, leaving that behind. And that really made it hard to do that, transcend and include and look back and because like wait, we're not, guys, like this is the thing that always strikes me as crazy is like, oh, this person's a prophet and I saw it in the spirit. So don't believe what your eyes say. Don't believe what the five senses tell you because I saw it in the spirit. And I'm like, okay, so are the five senses that God gave you, like you believe God created you with these five senses, are they inferior to this supposed supernatural sense you have too? Like, are you supposed to ignore it doesn't, Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I like, you know,
it's strange credulity. I mean, but you know, these are the same people that John and I, when we were growing up, would tell us that like you can't trust your heart.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because your heart is wicked and deceitful of all things, and so it can't be trusted, which means you can't trust your emotions, which means you can't trust the very thing that you know. But then I'd go into these hyper charismatic meetings, and it's all emotion.
Yeah,
all they're doing is trying to tweak your emotions. All they're doing is they're playing that trance music like you do. You're just talking about it. But they're like, you know, hey, we're going to repeat this song on we'll put Oceans on repeat until everyone just weeps in the aisles. But don't trust your emotions, unless of course we're the ones pulling the strings and we're the ones tweaking those emotions. And so I'm sitting there going, man, my entire life has been a lesson in don't trust how you feel. And then these guys come along, don't trust what you see. Your lying eyes, or you got to trust, by that time by the time Trump came along, I was done. I was done with that movement. I was just about done with church in general. I was certainly done with any kind of evangelical church because of that wanton embrace of somebody who like completely is the antithesis of everything you say you believe. That's actually what, if there was a rift that was caused in our family at all, it was between me and people that I respected and loved, who had raised me to look at a guy like that and go, no. And all of a sudden they're his most ardent defenders. And I'm like, I don't understand this world. I'm in the fucking upside down world. I don't get it. It's like, wait a minute. If this guy was a Democrat, you'd hate his guts. But because he's got an R next to his name, he's at least your champion, I guess. But anyway, that's all. That just shows to me some of the bankruptcy of religion in general. And it's not like evangelicals somehow hold the, they don't exactly hold the copyright on that. There's plenty of hypocrisy to go around, but it was on naked and open display. I think that's what sort of pushed me over the edge.
Yeah. I came to a point where it's like, I don't want to, and it's kind of going back to what we were talking about before, like there's no point in trying to convince anyone of anything when we've had unreality weaponized through all of these, social media channels for the last 5 years. So, and I mean that, like, it's weaponized unreality, whether it's, QAnon or just crazy, COVID denialism and whatever. There are people out there who are still going on and on about things that are just not true, but there are people that are just buying it and living we're not in the same world. So I can't have a conversation with somebody on those terms. And so it becomes like, well, what do I value? What do I want here? Is it really that important for me to change their mind? And the answer is no, not really. Especially if I know it's futile, there's really no point. And as far as family goes, I made a decision that I'm going to, I'm gonna value relationships over any kind of ideology, and I'm not going to talk about it with them. Like, if somebody wants to come to me and say, "Hey, you were talking about this thing, and it was, I'd like to know more. Do you have some information?" Then we can talk about information. But
sure,
just no point in having,
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. There was no utility in any of it. Let's just have this long, protracted argument. And I got to the same point where my thing was, we're not working from the same definitions even. Like these words, we're saying the same words and we don't mean the same thing at all.
Right.
So until we can agree on what that thing is, then everything else is fruitless. So let's talk about something else. I just wish I had, other things to talk about. Let's talk about football or something. God, I don't know. John, that was the thing that sustained John and I for years, because what was interesting was he left the church. I stayed in. I made a conscious decision. I think he probably did too, that we loved each other enough that we weren't going to let that be an impediment to our relationship. So we just didn't talk about it for decades, man. Didn't come up. We had other things to talk about. We'd talk about music. We had that in common. We'd talk about sports. We'd talk about food and beer. And there's 100 other things to talk about. God help me what I have found is that I have some of these relationships that have gone by the wayside as I left the church or I became more outspoken. Well, those weren't really relationships. They were only ever valuable as long as we all believed this one thing.
Yeah.
And when we didn't anymore, there was nothing else to hold that relationship together. So, and that's okay.
It was a little frustrating to me because probably by around 2018, I had this sense that like a lot of people were gone, and maybe they were people that I didn't know beyond, social media or, talking on the phone or things like that. But people that were from my sort of like charismatic Christianity world, I was pretty vocal on social media for a while. I don't do that anymore, but I was pretty vocal about, politics and things like that. And I was very frustrated. And all those people just disappeared, just ghosted, gone.
I think we all have that in common. And I think I think one of the things we did realize is those friendships or relationships weren't real anyway. They were so shallow.
Right. But you and I and Noel all probably pulled way back from I don't post nearly as much on social media stuff like that as I used to. And every once in a while, the wild hair would get me and I'll throw something out there. But man, I used to post 2, 3, 4 times a day. The more controversial, the better. If I get circled with a shitstorm, that was great. And then I just got exhausted. You know what I mean? It's just, and it wasn't, and the other part that you may or may not agree with was nothing changed. I didn't convince anybody. It turned into an echo chamber of people who thought I was great or people who thought I was the devil. But I don't remember one conversation of somebody going, wow, you know what? I never saw it that way before. No, people just dig in, and
it's not a good venue for that. And I think the pandemic was good at showing this to a lot of people. I had a couple of years of isolation before the pandemic because I was living that way, because of circumstances. It's not a good replacement for community, for in real life embodied actual community. And I still don't really have much of that. Like I don't, to this day, like I'm kind of like I work from home and, like most 99% of my other, human conversations are with my kids who are all, 18 and up now. That's and that's not really that healthy. Like it's good to be like, to be in community. And that's, one thing church does offer. If you can find one that fits, that you fit into, like, I think that's people talk about, the word religion coming from, the Latin, religio, like to bind together, and, say that as a negative thing, but I don't think it's all negative. I think that we need social cohesion and we need community and we need things that hold us together, and that can be really healthy. Like if it's religion done right, that can be really good and really healthy.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I'm like, I like Brian Zond an awful lot. And he's a big proponent of, religion, as he perceives it as being more of it's more about, a community coming together to do some things together, to remember communally. It's why you do the sacraments in community. It's why, that's whole religion. I remember hearing that. I remember reading that in a I think it was Andrew Farley, the first place I read it. And it was very, very negative. It was like, he just want to put you back into bondage.
Right, exactly.
That's just, and I'm like, yeah, totally. And a few years later, I'm like, that's not always, being bound to something is not always a bad thing. You could be, hell, my wife and I are bound in marriage. I hope that's not a negative thing. It means we have things in common. We have ties that hold us, that connect us to other people. And we need that. So like anything else, I think, you can be as addicted to religion as you are to anti-religion, and just go swing the pendulum the other way, throw the entire, experiment out. But yeah, I think there's a healthy middle ground there. I think the beautiful thing is to let people find where that middle ground is for them and be fine with like, listen, if this works for you, it works for you. That's great. I'm not here to tell you it's bad or nothing. So I think the problem has been over the years that church, as big Big E church or Big C church has decided that it has to look a certain way. It has to, they've tried really hard to contain and define it in certain ways and not left room for people to experience that community in other ways. And so, hell, I would imagine that amongst the friends that you all do music together, there's some community there. You have some things in common, that you have a common vocabulary and some common experiences that would help bind you together. So,
right. One of the things about the what I've done for a living for the majority of my life now is exactly that I've traveled to a lot of places and I've made a lot of friends. And some, there are people that I've maybe only been in the same room with once, or maybe never been in the same room with. Our real main connection might be through music. I've done musical collaborations with people I've never been in the same room with, obviously through the internet. But I've made what I consider to be real friends that way, that are, and it is community. It's not quite the same as embodied community, but there is definitely, something there in terms of.
Yeah, I tell you what, awesome. No, this is great. So this is why we wanted to have you on. See,
and you realize it's been like 2 years since you guys asked me the first time.
It's been well. You were literally. I'm not blowing smoke, but when we started thinking about people that we wanted to have on, you popped in my head like really quickly, and one of the reasons was you're so different from. We have a lot of people on who are promoting books. We have a lot of, and that's great. And they're. But John and I want a diverse group of people that are also doing music, and maybe they're right. We just had a guy on last week who's a really good poet, and so we got to talk poetry, and so art in all of its forms and however it takes space, and we had I don't know if you know who David Hayward is, the Naked Pastor, and a bit of a dissident in that respect. He's so we like the idea of dissident art, whatever form it takes. And so we've had, I think you're one of only a couple musicians we've had on, which I think is awesome. We need more. I was pretty nervous about it. And at the time when you guys first asked me, I was, I was going through a lot of things. And that was when my dad was sick. Right. And he passed away in 2021. And because of COVID, and him being on chemo, I couldn't go see him, until it was at the very end. And it's like, well, you had other things on your mind but anyway, I'm glad we made it work, and I'm glad we made it happen. I'm hoping it's not the last time we talk.
Yeah, I was, I hope it was interesting. I just definitely felt like at the time, and even now, like, what do I have to offer to this conversation? You've had Brian Zond and Brad Jerzak and Paul Young, and some amazing authors and voices, and so I hope it's something that I don't know. I hope some part of my little goofy story helps. It's useful to somebody.
100%. John, what do you got, man?
I was just saying, let me add, because Nat's literally not blowing smoke when your name was one of the first names he mentioned as someone he wanted to come to bring on the podcast. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know your music. I didn't know anything. So most people. So then I went and checked out your music. Nat sent me a couple links to some specific songs that he really, really liked. I mean, I became a fan almost instantly. Your music is not something I normally listen to. It's not really in my wheelhouse. And I tell this to a lot of people because they really want to like pigeonhole me into like a type of music I like. And my response always is, I like anything as long as it's done well. There's very few genres that I don't like as long as it's done well. And your music is done well. I've listened to a lot of your stuff.
Thank you.
So there are other artists within your genre that I wouldn't listen to, but your music and anyone who's listening to this needs to go out and check it out.
Yeah. Actually, what is the best? How do I put it this way? What's the most profitable way for people to listen to your music?
Yeah, really. Yeah, exactly. That's a good question.
What platform compensates artists the best?
Let me drop my PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App in the description.
We'll drop it for sure. And you can send them MP3s or
no,
MP3s. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah. I mean, DJs still buy.
I'm looking at your Spotify page right now, and there's tracks everywhere. It's all kinds of great stuff. Deconstructed from 2015. I really liked that.
Yeah, I don't like that. You know, it's funny thing about that one. Like I was, those are all remixes by other people. Like I did that original track, and it's funny that it's called Deconstructed because I was deconstructed at that time, and it was about me as a human being feeling like I was just like destroyed, basically.
Right.
Like I was like, okay, I built it all up from here. It wasn't about, you know, deconstruction of faith or whatever. Because I was just re-entering the faith in a lot of ways, and really, like I was just coming back in. But that track, you know, it was a track at a time. There was a period of time there, 2011, 12, 13, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with like, you know, EDM scene talk or whatever, but there was a period of time where this kind of music just really blew up, right? And now it's very mainstream. Like you get 100,000 people at, you know, Electric Daisy Carnival or whatever. But there was a time when it had been really less popular throughout the aughts, and around 2011 it really exploded. And at the same time, I took a residency at a club in South Florida where I was also doing the talent buying, booking the DJs. So like I made a lot less music during that time. And then the sound of that moment was different than what I'd always done. And I kind of got like I saw people suddenly like going from like, you know, squeaking by on an annual income as a DJ to like making millions of dollars. And so I'm like, well, let me try to emulate that like sort of big room popular sound of the time. And Deconstructed was that. It was still me, but it was like a little more of like me trying to like fit into the things. And I guess the point is I lost my way a little bit for a while musically. And so that I never like that track, it's fine. I don't love it, but I gave it to this label in Russia, and they do, I don't know what they do, but they, for some reason, like every remix they had done of it, everything, it's always at the top of my like Spotify, like,
yeah, it's literally it's like the page. Like when you go to your page on Spotify, it's like on the front page,
yeah,
dude.
I don't know. I think they're botting the plays.
You must be really proud of it. No, yeah.
Now, there are some things on there I'm really proud of. There's a track on there that I named after a Richard Rohr book that I'm actually really proud of, and that's it's sort of indicative of my future direction. It's a little more of a electronica. It's not very specifically genre pigeonholed, very orchestral, and it's called Falling Upward.
Okay. I love that book, by the way.
Yes, me too.
What a great book.
Yeah. So that is, that's probably a good place to start, but there's literally years. I have a playlist on my Spotify page called, Noel Sanger Snapshots. I add anything new that comes out, gets added there. We have a playlist for, the label for Dissident Music, which is just all of our newest releases get added there. So that's a good place. I'm pretty proud of what we've done with the label over the last couple of years. It's not a giant commercial success, but it's, in our world, it's pretty respected, and people like the tracks we're putting out. A lot of big DJs all over the world playing them. So it's cool.
I love that. I feel like, it's almost like how I feel about like this little publishing group that John and I are associated with. It's boutique. It's neat. Inside of these little circles, like we do well. We're nowhere near New York Times bestsellers, but inside of these circles, I think they're doing good work. You know what I mean? And that doesn't necessarily need to have, obviously you want the music you create and the books you write, that you want to have as wide a circulation as possible. You create that so that people can enjoy it. But yeah, I like it. If you're listening to the podcast and you're one of our regular listeners, one of our 5 or 6 regular listeners, no, and this kind of music's not in your wheelhouse, stretch yourself a little bit. Like just go to Noel's Spotify page, Apple Music, whatever pays him the most. And
okay. It doesn't matter.
I know. I know the royalties paid to artists on Spotify are like minuscule, but check it out. I mean, because there's more there than you think. Probably. I used to play. Actually, what used to crack me up is when I was a youth pastor for a little while. I used to play your stuff for my youth group while they were just mingling and hanging out. And we'd have little club time, and they thought it was badass. Like, who is this guy? So I turned a bunch of those guys onto your stuff because they were like, "This is awesome," because they thought they were clubbing at church, which was awesome. So,
yeah, no, I had somebody message me years ago, like when I was being very outspoken and Jesus-y online, and this dude was like, "Hey, my friend DJs between services at Elevation Church in Charlotte, right? Big mega church."
Oh yeah,
and he's like, "Can you send me?" Yeah, exactly. He's like, "Can you send me some tracks for him to play? They love it. They love it there." I'm like, "Yeah, cool. Love getting in church."
They dug it, man. They dug it. We still do. So check out Noel's stuff. We'll link to some. We'll put some links in the show notes, and we'll commission him to write a theme song for the podcast. There, after that,
there you go.
Do a remix of. No, I'll think of something. Anyway. No, man, it was awesome, man. It really was. Having known you known you online for a while, I'm really glad to actually get a chance to talk to you in person. We've exchanged many little messages here and there, but to actually have a chance to have a conversation is great.
It's great to be here. Absolutely greght to be here. And then, maybe once we're done recording, you guys can give me some like beard tips, because
absolutely,
it took me 50 years to grow this, and
I'll give you all the beard tips that I know, man, for what they're worth, which won't be much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.